I'd say like the number one thing that you need to remember that is going to govern anything that you decide to do is know when to escalate it. Because if someone cancels a deal on you and then you go flying off the handle, calling your lawyer and getting all legal on them and stuff, that isn't, in my opinion, a very good idea at all.
Right. So, in your personal experience, what's some of the main reasons why people tend to cancel an agreement?
I was thinking about this on the way up here, and I was thinking probably what it really boils down to when people, you get that email and it's like, I don't want to go ahead with this anymore. And usually I feel that it's when the two sides' expectations were not met one way or another.
Sure.
So the expectations they had going in and when they did the deal didn't transpire for them one way or another.
Sure. Yeah. So do you think that is due to perhaps poor communication up at the beginning? What are some of the factors that you think are kind of determining that lack of matching expectation?
Yeah, I think it probably is a number of different things. Something to do with maybe the business model of the product or service that they feel that they're going to be committed to buying into, where they basically, it was the first time they ever dealt with that company, so they didn't really know how they worked. And they were expecting what they were expecting to get, like just didn't transpire.
Yeah.
Which is not to say it wouldn't have happened if they'd just been patient and allowed the process to take its course.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my personal experience, a lot of times what ends up happening is, I think you could definitely divide it into perhaps a few different categories, right? So you have the good intentions.
Yeah.
You have the poor communication.
Yeah.
And then you have the bad intentions.
Yeah.
So the good intention is, well, something came up, something changed, we're just not in a position we kind of have to.
Yeah.
And then they try to find a way out.
Yeah, I also think it can be just because they know they can do it and because they do loads of deals with all kinds of people. I mean, talking about a specific territory we won't mention, but there is a specific territory that I think a lot of people probably...
what territory you're talking about.
Right? And they just know, we'll do loads of deals, and we probably won't do all of them. None of them will. And guess what? Like, nothing's going to happen to us because of where we're located. And so that's obviously like a huge challenge when you have like a serial contract canceller on your hands.
Yeah. I mean, definitely jurisdiction plays a huge part, and we've talked about
this. As usual, it's always king, jurisdiction.
Yeah, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts, and I would definitely say that, generally speaking, the advice that we've given on this podcast many times is try to be very careful, try to choose a jurisdiction that is fairly neutral, try to choose a jurisdiction that is going to be accessible, right, in terms of actually escalating it to potentially submitting it to the courts or even having access to lawyers on the ground, because all those things are the worst case scenario, but it is a potential scenario.
Definitely, and it's it must be really hard for people out there to actually know, because how can everyone know, if you're working globally and you're selling your services or your product globally, how are you supposed to know that German law is going to end up transpiring, from the point of view of if you didn't deliver the services yet, they can get a refund under German law, but under English contract law, they could not, because actually it's the value of the contract, so there will be no refund. Oh, but they didn't do the services yet. It doesn't matter. The contract's the contract, and if you cancel that contract, they lose the value of that contract.
Correct.
And contract law is completely and utterly different to German, business law that governs German business.
Yeah. Just like it is in the U.S., and then in the U.S. you've got state and state. So it really does vary. So you need someone on your side to kind of help you navigate. So what do you think is the course of action that someone should take in the event of an actual breach of contract?
I think, obviously there's breach of contract and there's a cancellation of a contract. Yeah. So I'd say it might be the same type of response to both. But I'd say if you're in a position where you have like a client, you've sold this deal to that client, and now they're trying to cancel, then what should you do? From that point of view, I'd say like the number one thing that you need to remember that is going to govern anything that you decide to do is know when to escalate it. Because if someone cancels a deal on you and then you go flying off the handle, calling your lawyer and getting all legal on them and stuff, that isn't, in my opinion, a very good idea at all.
Right.
And but some people, it freaks them out and it's a knee-jerk reaction. So they just go crazy. So I'd say you need to just give it some thought and even sleep on it a bit and just figure out exactly what are your remedies, what steps you should take. You should obviously look at the reason why they're saying they're going to cancel and attack the foundation of their reasoning.
Sure.
Absolutely. That would be the number one thing to do. And that might be that you even, get the stakeholder from your business who created that agreement, signed that deal or sold that service, and actually have that stakeholder take a bit of responsibility for it rather than sending out the line to legal or the boss of the company or a lawyer or something, and try and keep it at that same level that it was at before within those two stakeholders.
Sure.
If it then has to escalate later, it's a game of poker. You really ought to be playing it one card at a time, with your legal remedies being at the very end of it, and then a trial being at the very end of that. 'Cause you don't want to go to trial; it's so expensive. Most disputes don't end up in court, do they? They get settled before. No one wants to go to court.
No, and I I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, time and time again, whether it's a cancellation request or whether it's someone ultimately, I don't know, having a bad day or losing their temper on the other side, the worst thing you can do is match that with just you losing your temper. So I completely agree with you. The one thing you should probably do is try to get a hold of the person that you did the contract with in the first place and try to see if there is some sort of reasonable mitigation that can be done. I think perhaps what a lot of people are inexperienced at doing, or perhaps don't have the confidence to do, is to be comfortable in a position where there's a clear confrontation, right? Because you are basically saying, I don't want to work with you anymore. I want to walk away from this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people take that personally, right? Because they don't see it as a chess game where it's like, okay, well, now you're playing a chess game. This is no longer, necessarily on friendly grounds. This is perhaps on slightly belligerent grounds, but it doesn't just have to be, the F-bomb to you and to me back and forth. It's a chess game. So what's the first move that you're going to play, right? And on that basis, what you have to think about is you have to try to get that person to perhaps definitely calm down a little bit if they're in an emotional state, or perhaps understand what the next options are going to be without necessarily sounding like you're trying to threaten them, but just to walk them through it and say, look, I'm not a pushover, so me having this call with you is not me going, please, let's continue to do business.
Yeah.
It's me just saying, look, I don't want this to escalate and neither you, because if we do, this is not going to be good for either of us, right? So let's try to come up with a reasonable solution. You don't want to have to deal with this in 6 months. I don't particularly want to either. The reality is there is a contract. Let's try to figure something out. And if you do it in that way, then I think what you're expressing is your willingness to find a middle ground, but you're also not saying you can walk all over me just because I've come to the table. If that makes sense,
And I think it also obviously depends on their intention for cancelling the agreement in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I tend to find that usually, like we just discussed before, there's different cases. There are either companies who deliberately knew that it would happen anyway, and with them, obviously, there's no good faith. Or it could be that someone hasn't been listened to. And when you
I agree.
You end up in a call with a call center, and it's some nice sort of invariably Scottish person chatting with you, and they're placating you. Oh, I'm very sorry, and of course we'll get your TV sent out to you, and then the thing, and we'll put everything right. Terribly, all it was somebody wasn't listened to, and maybe it could have been as simple as that. They weren't listened to properly, or something in the contract was missed. And actually, if you go back to them and say, well, the clause that you're saying enables you to leave, cancel the agreement, actually, doesn't it say it's if that thing doesn't happen for an entire year? So don't we have 9 months left to figure that out? And actually, we really do want to figure that out for you.
Yeah.
And then they're like, sweetness and light. And they're like, oh, well, if that's the case, I'm cool, And then suddenly you've turned the situation around. So without the need for any, wheeling in the big guns.